Hi guys, and welcome to A Dog's Soul, an empath's guide to your dog's feelings. Today we're going to talk about how to train a fearful reactive dog using positive reinforcement. So stay tuned and have fun. Alright, so to start this off, I'd like to just clarify that most reactivity, what we see on leash or at home when it comes to resource guarding or barking at strangers at the door or barking at the mailman or at other dogs when our dog is in the yard or all those things. So every time we see barking, lunging, growling, it's almost always fear related. There are two emotions that can lead to such behavior, and those are fear and frustration. And frustration rarely comes alone. There is very often a fear component included, but fear can come alone, and it's the most common reason behind a dog acting like this. Still, it's sometimes very embarrassing for us. It can be very dangerous because not every dog stays at reactive. Some will use their teeth if the reactivity is not enough for them to get the results they want. And of course, we don't want to live with such a dog. We want to have peace and quiet in our homes. We don't want to tiptoe around the house because our dog could be somewhere guarding something. And we don't want the neighbors to talk about us and all those things. So reactivity is really something that shines a spotlight on us that we really don't want. All right? So it's something we have or we want to get rid of pretty fast. And fortunately, it is very often resolved pretty fast. Some dogs take longer. It always depends on how this came up, how the dog got to a point where he assumed every other person or every other dog, those are the most common things, are dangerous. Some dogs just have never learned to interact with people or with dogs, and so they are afraid of it. And everything you don't know how to act about is kind of scary. But sometimes there have been traumatizing events as well. So maybe the dog got bitten by a specific looking dog, and from that point on, every dog that looks almost the same or even a little bit like that is presumed dangerous. Or even every other dog, because the dog didn't have very many positive experiences with other dogs to begin with. And then an incident happened where the dog got bitten, and from that point on, our dog is pretty sure that every other dog is dangerous because the only experience he can get back to is a bad one. And with such dogs, it sometimes takes longer. And it takes longer, of course, when the dog is afraid of us as well. So if we have a fearful dog who is not quite sure yet that the human he's living with is trustworthy, training is a lot slower because we have to earn the dog's trust first. Only then can we provide him with strategies to help him out of a situation and to trust us in a dangerous situation. And what situation is dangerous and what is not is for the dog to decide, not for us. That's the most tricky part about all of that. And we can see it on the dog's body language, but sometimes the switch between the dog trying to just opt out and for example, sniff very intensely and try to ignore what's going on around him, and him reacting is very fast because the other dog is getting closer, and there is a point where our dog cannot pretend to ignore that dog anymore. It gets too uncomfortable and he will react in an instant. So this is where it gets really tricky. But let's maybe start from the beginning and categorize it a little bit. Let's start with a dog who is reactive towards us in the household. So we have a dog who is fearful and who doesn't trust us and who might show some reactivity towards us when we come closer, or when we enter a specific room, or when we are wearing specific clothes or a specific scent, or if we get towards something that's important to the dog. So we're dealing with resource scouting. And of course, the most important resource for a dog is his own well-being. So he can protect himself. He can also protect his stuff, or things he thinks are his stuff. And when we have a dog like that, we have to, of course, use management indoors. So try and implement strategies that keep us and the dog safe, and other family members that might roam around the house. And that could be baby gates or locked doors or things like that. For some dogs, it might even be wearing a muzzle 24/7. There are dogs where this is necessary to keep everybody safe. Not very often, but they are out there, so it could be a thing. And when we have management in place, we need to give the dog a feeling of security and safety in his own home. So not trying to provoke him, not trying to take anything from him or get into a fight with him in any kind of way. And then we associate ourselves with positive things. So we do not try to take things away from him, but we add positive things to whatever he already has. And the most easy thing is food, of course. So, for example, if we have our dog in his room and he's fine when we are outside a baby gate, we don't need to close the door anymore. We can just be outside the baby gate, our back turned to the dog, and throw treats in, and then go away. So the dog sees us really as no threat, but as a source of something positive. And when it comes to reactivity towards the outside world, but still in the home, it's also important to use management. It just looks differently. So there are dogs who seem to really seek stimuli and seek things they can react to, because they are just in such a high stress level that this spiral is kind of the only thing they know where they can vent a little bit. And if this happens, we need to provide the dog with a certain time of deprivation. It sounds bad, but it's just a little time where the dog doesn't have to deal with a gazillion outside stimuli all the time and can just get the stress level a little bit down. Because if we are at such a high stress level, training is possible, but it's way harder. Alright? So we can use window panes, we can use curtains, we can take the dog on potty breaks in the garden on leash to prevent him just being out there on his own and being able to charge the fence and things like that. We can turn off the bell if that's a trigger, always depending on what's possible, of course. If we need the bell because the mailman has to ring the bell for some kind of reason, okay, but for training purposes, it's always more useful to take a break from that. because if the dog's constantly reacting to something, we cannot tell him that it's not necessary, because in his opinion, it's necessary, because otherwise the mailman doesn't leave. That's not true, of course, but the dog sees it like that because it's what's happening. The mailman comes, rings the bell, the dog barks and charges the door, and the mailman leaves. What does that tell you? The dog, right? And if we have a calm dog and a situation that is controllable, we can start training. So for example, if we have turned off the bell and we buy a new bell, we can start counter conditioning that new bell first and then install it in the door. So the dog first learns that this sound means something completely different than visitors. And that's the first experience he has with that sound. It's way easier. We can also vary times when we take our dogs out in the garden, or even if we have a dog that goes crazy on leash, because there are more frequent walking times and we don't have to use exactly those with our dog, right? So always depending on the neighborhood, of course, but if we're living in a neighborhood where a lot of people work 9 to 5, then the most common walking time could be 6, because then they got home and they need to take the dog out for a potty break, right? So we avoid 6 o'clock walks. Or we walk somewhere where we meet nobody. And again, this is not a permanent solution. You don't have to do this all the dog's life. Just to take a little break from reactivity, take a little break from the stress, get the stress level down, and then start in a situation the dog can actually handle. And we too. It's not only just the dog who is overwhelmed by the situation, it's us as well. Like if we are trying to teach the dog some kind of alternative behavior, but we have only 3.5 seconds to do that because the other dog is approaching so fast, and after that one's gone, the next one is, 5.3 seconds away, and things like that. It happens way too fast, and it's not anything we can do that fast. So we need a halfway quiet environment to teach our dog what we want, and then add distractions. If we try to teach the dog what we want in the situation, it's almost impossible for the dog to listen. Because when you're overwhelmed, you can't just listen to somebody telling you, hey, you only need to do this and the situation resolves itself. It's not that easy. So we teach what we need in a situation where the dog is easygoing and relaxed and can really learn pretty well and listen, and we are relaxed too, because let's face it, in a situation where we know our dog will go cuckoo, we are not that relaxed. We are not that calm, and we might not make the best decisions ourselves. So if we exercise for the situation in a relaxed situation, we can just get our bodies to do this on autopilot. And then we can add whatever is difficult for the dog, people or dogs or whatever, and increase the difficulty and the way the stimuli are approaching or not approaching, just standing, in a way we can handle. And that always means both the dog and the human. Sometimes I see teams where the dog is fine until the other dog is very close, but the human is actually not. So we have very different distances both sides of the leash need. And we start with whoever needs more. So if the human tenses up at, 50 feet, then we start at 55. And if the dog tenses up sooner, then we start with even more. Because what we have as a huge advantage in positive reinforcement training is that we can feel good while training. And we can work with positive emotions. And we can tailor the training to our needs and our dog's needs. That's why it's fun. That's why it's easy. Of course, after some practice, because everything we do for the first time is hard. That's always the case. But the results are lasting. We have emotions connected to situations, and that's what making this whole thing sustainable. The dog doesn't only learn to shut up and live with it. The dog actually learns how to deal with it in a way that makes him feel good. And the human as well. That's sometimes forgotten in training, but it's so important. So, you see, there are different situations where we can have reactivity happening, and it's almost always fear related. And the solutions are very individual. So our best bet is to get a professional on board and create a plan that works for our needs and for our situations and with our dog. We can always do everything by ourselves, and I did that with my dog in the beginning because I was just interested in the stuff and I wanted to learn that, and I had a trainer with me and I had lessons with her again and again, but in between I got up with new things I wanted to try and methods and things like that, and I always asked her if that was a good idea or not. But I learned a lot by myself. But it definitely takes up all your time. It's really, it takes up all your time. I spend hours a day just learning, and that's why I decided to become a dog trainer, because if you have such a passion for something, it's clear, but it's what you need when you want to do it all by yourself. If you don't have the time or don't want to know about every dog, just your own, get a professional on board, because we have done it. We have done all the work. We can just present it to you on a silver platter and just tweaked so it fits your needs, right? That said, I hope you liked the episode, and I would love for you to click the subscribe button or the plus in Apple Podcasts and tell me what you think, or tell me what is going on with your dog at the moment. If you need any specific topic in the podcast, I would love to just include it in our little talks. And I wish you an amazing time training and an amazing time figuring out how to get your stress levels down. Enjoy your time with your dog. Never forget why you got him in the first place and why you love him. Until next time. Bye.